Hey guys, welcome back to the Dillon England Show. Today we have on Kyle Mann.
Kyle Mann.
Kyle Mann.
Kyle Mann.
A journalist.
Editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee.
When Twitter banned the Babylon Bee, Elon gave you guys a call.
Elon messaged us on Twitter and was like, "Are you guys banned?"
I think you guys were one of the first action items that he did when he bought Twitter was unbanning you guys, right?
Washington Post says that when he walked in the door, that one of the first things he said was, "Free the Babylon Bee."
What was one of the surprisingly hardest things about creating this movie that you didn't see coming?
Trying to in editing, trying to smush it all together in a way that made sense. And the balance of making it feel like a full movie.
Were you guys concerned jumping into this about getting in trouble from the government? Hey guys, before you jump into today's show, you're going to want to subscribe because next week we're going to be traveling to AmFest in Arizona. It's probably the biggest conservative conference in the world, honestly. It's held by Charlie Kirk and Turning Point, and we're going to be interviewing some of the top conservatives in the world. We are going to have a Media Row booth there. The content's going to be great. You're not going to want to miss it. So please subscribe. And the Babylon Bee, they released a movie. It's available if you go to thebabylonbee.com. You can subscribe there, or you can go to their X account and subscribe there, and you can watch their new movie. It's available now. So please, if you enjoy this episode with Kyle Mann, you are going to enjoy the movie. Go show some support to the Bee and subscribe to them and support their content. And without wasting any more time, let's jump into today's conversation with Kyle Mann on the Dillon England Show. Appreciate you coming on the show, man. This is, I've been part of the Babylon Bee, I guess, consumer base since the beginning, back when I was in college. I went to the same school that Joel's younger brother Aaron went to. And so we've just been consuming Babylon Bee articles pretty much for the past decade. So I didn't know who you were until I talked to Joel. So did you jump in with Seth, or when did you kind of hop on the Babylon Bee train?
Well, I've been with the Babylon Bee since day one. I wasn't a founder. I did hop on the train because Adam Ford, it was just his little brain baby. And he just had this idea that the Onion is out there using satire to make these great points that I disagree with. He had this respect for the way that the Onion was able to tell a joke about a point that he was like, that's the worst point in the world. But man, that's a funny way to say that. I think Adam one time told me, the Onion made me want to be a liberal. I'm probably butchering the way he said it, but it was basically like, it's such it makes a good joke makes your worldview look so attractive to people on the outside. Like, oh man, I want to be on the inside laughing along with these people, but I disagree with this point. And so he's like, is there a way that we can do that, for Christians, for conservatives? And that's how the Babylon Bee was born. I didn't know Adam at the time. I just followed him. He published a little Christian reformed webcomic. It's kind of like the Oatmeal, but for Christians. And it would like almost graphic novel essays, sort of. It would make a point, but kind of in a visual essay format sort of thing. And I followed that. I really enjoyed those comics. I bought some of his merch, hardcore fan. But he had like 20,000 followers on Facebook or something. It wasn't a huge following. But at the time, you could actually reach your audience on Facebook. If you had 20,000 people, that was pretty strong. You could drive some subscribers. So he had kind of launched like a Patreon and had, I don't even remember the numbers, but his subscribers, he was probably making $40,000 a year from subscriptions, and quit his job and I'm going to do this full time, which sounds insane, right? And he said, as a side project, while I'm doing this, I'm gonna do this, Christian version of the Onion, and then overnight it became a viral hit. It became his full-time job. So I emailed in. I saw he posted on Facebook, looking for writers for this new venture, and it spoke to me like the Onion, but funny again, or the Onion but Christian. I was like, oh my gosh, this is everything I've ever wanted, And so all my wildest dreams are coming true, So I emailed him a headline. It was the Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation as fog machine breaks, and I emailed that to him, and I wrote the whole article just randomly and he published it the next day. It became our first big viral hit. So he hired me as the full-time or part-time head writer. And then 2 years later, when Seth bought the site, there was kind of enough financial backing from Seth that we could just kind of, which it still operated independently, but Seth basically was able to say, like, if we got canceled from Facebook, I could keep you employed full-time at least. So I was able to be hired full-time as editor-in-chief at that point. So long story short, that's the long story short.
That's incredible. Did you have any comedy background or writing background? What kind of drew you to the B as far as like, yeah, I could do this. I would enjoy this.
Yeah, it was more like the second part of what you said. Like, I would enjoy this than having any actual skill or like actual experience or training, in comedy. I didn't have any formal comedy training, which most of us don't. Joel didn't, Adam didn't. And it's funny, all of us kind of had the same story. Like, we were in some dead-end corporate sales job and bounced over to the Babylon Bee to write comedy for a living. I don't know if that's a comment. I always feel like that's a bit of a commentary on like how soul draining so many of these like corporate desk jobs are, that you have to like make jokes to survive, but no, I had been, my biggest comedy accolade is like that I was voted class clown in senior year of high school.
Yeah.
And I was not the guy that's like, shooting spit wads at the teacher or whatever. I was a good student. I was well behaved and all that, but I just always had a quip. I was always like, yeah, what about this? I was always just a little bit of a goofball. I was in drama for 4 years, and so just kind of that nerdy theater kid that was always goofing around. But yeah, that's basically it. And my comedy background or training was really just from the entertainment side, like Christopher Guest films, A Mighty Wind, Spinal Tap, and Best in Show, and I love when I discovered Monty Python and the Holy Grail, like in sixth grade. It was like, I don't think I had ever. We rented it on VHS. I watched it at a friend's house, and we watched like that opening credit sequence, where it keeps doing like the Swedish subtitles, and then the guy gets fired for the subtitle. It just keeps going on, and we were laughing so hard. I remember my cheeks just hurting so bad, and we like rewound it and watched the title sequence 12 times in a row. We're just like dying laughing at it. So that kind of like subversive comedy that was so dry, takes itself so seriously, it became like the foundation for comedy for me. And that's what I always say at the Babylon Bee. Like, if we're shooting a news video or like I tell the writers when they're writing an article, is the most absurd thing you can think of said in the most serious way possible. And that's the formula for.
Well, it's kind of like Norm Macdonald too, right? Norm Macdonald was kind of the king of that kind of delivery of just dry and then just absolutely just great punchlines. I mean, he just strikes me as the same kind of comedy. I mean, when I showed my wife Monty Python and the Holy Grail, she only made it 30 minutes. I was dying laughing, and she's like, "This is the dumbest thing I have ever seen," and I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard. And same with like when I showed her Norm clips, she's like, "He's not funny," and I'm like, "No, he's hilarious." So it's just interesting how this comedy is very niche, where like some people love the dry comedy and other people are like, "What is this?" Have you found that to be an interesting thing for you guys, where some people just absolutely love the dry side of comedy and other people don't?
Now I want to do like one of those wife jack memes where the wife is like, "Why is it funny? They're just banging coconuts together, and this isn't funny." Like,
right. Right.
It's true. There's a male element to the Monty Python fan base, and that kind of comedy for sure. But comedy in general, like they've done studies, and like there are a certain number of people born that just do not understand jokes. Like, they'll get your basic jokes, they kind of understand what humor is, and they'll laugh. But like, if they see a joke in the wild, it takes them a while to recognize it, or they just don't get it. They just don't have that innate sense of humor. There's like a certain percentage of the population that just doesn't get humor the same way everybody else does. And then, add on top of that, when our comedy is specifically designed to be like unrecognizable from the news when it comes to the format, like that's the whole And that's the whole thing that makes Babylon Bee work is that you're scrolling, you see it in the wild, you see it on Facebook, you see it on X. So you're scrolling your feed and then it's like, oh, regular news headline. And then you see a Babylon Bee headline and it's like, wait, what? Oh, it's a joke. Like that's what makes the comedy hit, right? Is that it's presented in the same format and the same package that news is presented. So that's the dry element of saying it as seriously as possible. And then the absurd element is bringing in the punchline or the joke or the contrast or whatever. And so because of that additional element that now people have to recognize news from satire, that brings a whole new segment of the population that just isn't going to get it. But it makes the joke funnier to the people who do get it, right? When a bunch of people are like, what? I don't understand. It's pretty wild when you look at some of the jokes that we've done that people have mistaken for reality. You're like, really? You thought that was real? It's insane.
And it's only been getting harder for you guys, right? As the world just gets crazier and crazier. Jokes that you would have made when you guys started versus now are presented as truth. And, you're like, how hard is your job now trying to just show that you are satire in the crazy world we live in compared to when you guys stared? Has it been any harder?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. Like there's jokes that, the thing about our jokes coming true and, they become prophecies but it's true really in that, like, a lot of headlines that you read, you're like, man, I wish we would have thought of that. It's like a real news headline. I wish we'd done that before reality did it. But like we did a joke in 2017, I think, where it was like 2 + 2 = 4 says bigoted, white supremacist or like something like that. And it was a photo of a teacher, that was like teaching. And it was like we were kind of in that age where relativism was, we're kind of coming off the tail end of postmodernism. And that was the big thing that we were up against was like, it was always like liberals claim to be tolerant and yet they're intolerant, and liberals, say truth is relative and yet that's an absolute claim. Like that was kind of the thing that we were mostly fighting against at the time. And I think that shifted a little bit. So we were doing jokes like that, like, oh, 2 + 2 = 4. That must be racist or something like that. And then they actually did that. They actually made that argument a few years later that, well, 2 + 2 = 4 is actually based on colonialist understandings of math and reality. And, it's actually very oppressive to believe that 2 + 2 = 4.
Obviously.
You're like, what? Like how? Like we thought of the most absurd thing we could think of when we wrote that joke a few years ago. And now that line, the satire singularity has happened. And G.K. Chesterton predicted that too. And I know there's been other, I know that was like in George Orwell, like 2 and 2 make 4, or 2 and 2 make 5. But Chesterton said even before that, like that a day would come when you would be shouted down by the mob for saying that 2 + 2 make 4. And that's just an insane thing to think about. But Chesterton too was a humorist, and he's trying to write something so absurd, and it becomes reality. Yeah. So it is harder to write satire in that sense, but it's also a fun challenge. Like you have to find a unique angle. You have to find something that's funny, a unique observation. We call it like a third way of looking at things. And so that's the challenge for the humorist.
Yeah, that was a question I wanted to ask. I asked Joel back in May when he came on, and the world has gotten crazier and crazier and crazier. This is something I struggle with on X, and I was going to ask you if you struggle with the same thing. So I'm on X a lot. I see a lot of the crazy headlines. Sometimes I struggle to find the humor in leftism in the crazy world we live in. Yet you guys consistently are able to turn the crazy into something that's funny. And it makes it, someone like me can read a Babylon Bee headline and laugh at something I was just pissed about 5 minutes ago in the shower. Have you guys found it difficult to keep being funny because the world is becoming so insane? Or has that just become easier for you guys as writers to just pick apart the craziness and be funny?
I think when you're writing comedy, you always have to have a sense of joy and absurdity and a sense of humor about things that seems unnatural to people that don't have that gene or that aren't writing comedy for a living. Like, you have to look at a news headline where like Russia's launching nukes at the US or something and be like, okay, what's funny there's a sense in which you start to see everything through that lens. I mean, I used to be a construction salesman, and it's like I would drive my wife crazy because we'd be driving by some development or house or new housing or whatever, and I'm like, oh, look at that that fire hydrant is this industrial style that has a anti-theft locking mechanism, and I'm explaining, you see everything in terms of that in terms of that framework of whatever you're into, and so like, I sit down in church with my wife, and I'm like writing down headlines as the pastor's doing stuff. She's like, stop it, you're supposed to pay, but you start thinking everything in terms of headlines,
right.
So you see things that way. So it is a challenge to write news that's more insane than what like Democrats are already doing or what Republicans are already doing. And sometimes we feel like politicians come on our website and read it in the morning, and that's where they get their ideas. But I mean, it is a challenge. Like, so the nature of satire is a lot of times what you do is you take reality and you just exaggerate it. Yeah, you push it to the next logical conclusion. And when you have a world that is increasingly like stepping on the gas pedal, driving off the crazy cliff, like it's just natural that we're thinking, oh, what could they do next? And then they do it because that's, I mean, with progressivism, especially, like, that is the worldview of progressivism, is that you progress. I mean, you're supposed to go to the next thing and keep deconstructing and moving on to the next insane level and out woke each other to the next step. And so of course they're going to eventually out crazy themselves. So it is a challenge, but it's also fun. And it also makes it really funny. Like if we write something and then somebody actually fulfills the prophecy, it's hilarious.
When I was talking to Joel, he mentioned how much fun it was, like how easy Trump is to write into jokes. Like just he's that kind of person that brings a lot of jokes. Were you guys thrilled, not only just from being a conservative perspective that Trump got elected? Were you guys excited from just a comedy's perspective, like, hey, we're going to have another 4 years of just great material when Trump got elected? Just because you just know it's going to be wild.
We were actually terrified not terrified of Trump or like that he was, I think everybody was a little terrified of Trump in some way. Like even Republicans that voted for him, you're a little bit like, oh shoot, this actually happened. I think Trump was a little terrified of Trump. I think he was like, oh no, I won. What do I do next? We've never gotten this far. And but we had a headline prepared for if Hillary won. We didn't have a headline prepared for if Trump won because we didn't think he was going to win. And I think there's a sense in which it's easier to write satire when you're kind of the party on the outside. Comedy often, not always, but comedy often comes from a place of sitting on the fringes and poking at that cultural center of power. You're subversive. You're the guy sitting in the lawn chair laughing. You're the old guy on the porch. Look at all these losers. Like there's a sense in which you can't have a huge vested interest in maintaining power in order to be funny. Like you have to have a disregard for those who hold the cultural power. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh, our party, I didn't vote for Trump at the time, but it's like, our guy won. Like, what do we do now? Like now we're these comedians, and how do we navigate a Trump presidency as comedians when I think we're Republican comedians, conservative? It put us in a weird spot, but it turned out to be great for us, and we experienced most of our growth under the Trump presidency. And the reason for that is that the late night leftist comedians and The Onion and all these sources of left wing comedy suddenly gave up the mantle of being comedians and decided to become like cultural lecturers and the holders of the moral, the guardians of the moral truths of society and all that. Like they became so high and mighty trying to lecture people about how bad Trump was that it left this huge open space for us as conservative comedians to be like, oh well, we'll make fun of Trump, Yeah. and we'll do it in a fun way, and we'll actually make good jokes about Trump, and we'll make fun of the other side, and we'll just like our comedy. Even though our comedy obviously leans right, we make fun of the left more than we make fun of the right. Our comedy felt way more balanced at the time, which was insane.
Well, you even had like, conservative organizations sending you guys cease and desist, like Awana. Like Joel told me that whole story when he was on the pod of like, you made fun of everybody, conservatives, liberals, and you made fun of Trump, even when there's Trumpers being like, how dare you make fun of our president? Like, you guys don't care. And that's one thing that I've always loved about you guys.
Yeah. And like, I think you can read any comedy magazine or watch any comedy show and you kind of know where the people are coming from. So it's always a push. It's always a fight. Like, let's make sure someone doesn't just come on here and be like, oh, a bunch of boomer conservative hacks that are just making fun of the left, making pronoun jokes, a bunch of times a day. Like there is like that, that's my job, is a constant like steering of things. And you don't want perfect balance. Like you want to have a unique perspective and voice, but at the same time, you need to keep your audience on their toes. You need to be willing to make fun of your own audience. So a news story comes up where it's like, oh man, we could totally dunk on AOC or we could totally dunk on the left here. I need to be willing to go, what would be funnier though, is if we subverted this somehow and flipped it around and made fun of Republicans for this one or whatever. Like being able to keep your audience on their toes a little bit is part of doing that, part of making fun of, making a good comedy brand that people can come to and laugh no matter what side of the political aisle they're on.
Well, I think that's just the best comedians. I mean, Chappelle does that. I mean, he'll make fun of anybody and everybody. Like a lot of the best comedians are willing to make fun of their own audience sitting there in front of them. And that's something that you guys did. I did want to ask you one thing. So I am a little, I guess, celebrity shook when I'm talking to you, Kyle, and this is why. When Joel came on originally, he told me this story when, and you can maybe recount a little bit, when Twitter banned the Babylon Bee. And then Elon gave you guys a call. And Joel told me this story, and you can fill in anything I miss. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Elon called you, right?
Yeah. So
when Joel told me that, I was like, this is wild. Because for me, sitting there, Elon is just kind of the, he's the smartest guy in the world from what he's just a smart guy. When Joel told me the story, he was driving, he took a news show for you. When you heard that Elon wanted to talk to you, was that the first time you ever talked to Elon? Or could you maybe recount your side of this whole story of Twitter banning you guys and then Elon bringing you back? I'd love to hear your kind of version of that whole story. Because I heard it kind of from Joel, but I'd love to hear yours, your kind of version of this story. Because it's wild.
All right, let me give you the true story.
Okay.
I know you've heard Joel's side, but I'll give you the real story, man.
Thank you.
We posted that joke, the Rachel Levine joke, and I think it didn't even get flagged by Twitter. Like it was just another one of the jokes we wrote that week. And then we reposted it because we'll repost our jokes over the weekend to kind of fill in some of the content gaps on the weekend. So the repost of the joke somehow got flagged as hate speech or whatever. And that one is the one that got us banned. And then, of course, they wanted us to delete it. And if we deleted it, we could get back into our account. And we said, well, we're not going to do that. And it wasn't, from my perspective, and I don't know exactly what Joel told you, but from my perspective, there was no grand plan here. Oh, we're going to post this joke, get banned, and then say we're not going to delete it. And we'll make all these waves. And then Elon is going to buy Twitter. This is our grand business
plan, right?
Yes. And it was just a, like, these are our beliefs. And I think to all of us, there was an issue of conscience. Like if we delete this tweet, we're going back on our beliefs, like we're violating who we are and and what we believe, and we're not going to do that. And so it just kind of became this comedy of errors or this like random thing where, so Elon messaged us on Twitter and was like, "Are you guys banned?" like a few days later, I don't know if I don't remember if he just hadn't seen our posts in a while or like whatever, but ended up calling. I think then he ended up DMing me or something because he couldn't DM the B he DM'd the B, but no one got back to him because we couldn't get into our account.
So dumb.
So then he DM'd me. Then he called me. And we talked for a while. I don't remember, half hour, 40 minutes, something like that. And it was just a lot of chit chat, like just talking about, how woke things are getting and you watching anything good on Netflix and you know, that kind of stuff. And then it basically through that conversation, he was, we talked about free speech and the bee getting banned, and he was very, very clearly concerned about the free speech thing. And it was about a week later that he announced he was buying Twitter. I think he had already, if you look at like the filings, he had already maybe filed to purchase part of Twitter. And he was just doing some information gathering and trying to see where things stood on the free speech stuff. But it was clearly like that the Babylon Bee clearly played some kind of part in that, whether we were the main catalyst or not. Elon is to be credited as the one who stepped up and like said, you know what, I'm going to take care of this, which is just such a cool thing.
Did you already know that Elon was a fan of the Bee? Did you already know that he liked your guys' content before he reached out to you guys, or was this kind of like, oh, we had no idea Elon, liked us this much?
He had replied to a few articles with like a laughing emoji. So it had kind of become a thing. Like, wow, this is weird. Elon's interacting with our content,
Yeah.
This is strange. And then we had interviewed him. I think we had interviewed him prior to this.
Okay.
So he had come on our podcast randomly. And so we knew he was a fan of the Bee. We interviewed him with like 2-hour interview. It's on YouTube still. You can go check out. And then but it's not like we were like in constant contact with him. We had interviewed him one time, and then it was months later that this happened, and he reached out. So it had helped that we had built a little bit of a relationship with him, and he felt some kind of affinity for us, and was obviously pretty pissed that they had banned us.
Sure. Yeah, that story, when Joel told it to me, dude, and I appreciate you giving me the true version, because Joel just lied the whole time,
It's
like
true.
he does. So I appreciate you clearing that up for everyone.
Yeah, I always have to clean up his messes for sure. So
I appreciate that. When Elon messaged you, were you just like, and Elon called you, you had already met Elon, so it wasn't kind of like this is wild, or was it still kind of like, hey, honey, I'm just gonna go talk to Elon Musk real quick, no big deal, or is it kind of like a surreal moment for you?
It was definitely surreal, because when we had met him at the interview, it was like none of us had really talked to him. It was like an email back and forth, and sure, I'll do this interview and come to this spot and we'll do it. And then we sat down and talked with him on camera. But you're on camera, you're like, so Elon, what's going on with the next rocket? Like it's not this personal thing. And we chatted with him for a while after, and he seemed very personable. But then he left, and it was like we didn't really talk to him for a while after that. So then me, like, I'm not even the CEO of the Bee, I'm the editor-in-chief. So it's like, oh, he should probably call Seth. But for some reason, he had seen me, pop up as one of the guys, and he had remembered me from the interview. So he DM'd me, and I'm like, I'm introverted. I'm not the big, face of the company guy going out there like, yeah, look at me, So it's like, I get this thing like, oh, I'm going to call you in a few minutes. And you're like, oh, shoot. Like, I don't know how to talk to somebody on the phone, let alone, the richest guy in the world. So it was definitely nerve wracking.
That's awesome.
But he's just a normal dude. Like you just like, again, you start and talk to him, it's surreal, but he's just, just talking about video games and Netflix shows.
And next thing you know, he buys Twitter. And I heard this to be true. I don't know. And I think you guys were one of the first action items that he did when he bought Twitter was unbanning you guys, right?
Yeah, Washington Post says that when he walked in the door, that one of the first things he said was "Free the Babylon Bee," which is pretty dang cool. I mean, that's like a little feather in the cap, I guess. But again, not any kind of business plan from our end. Call it a God thing,
Yeah. Well, it shows the power of comedy too. I mean, when you can make someone laugh and someone really appreciate your comedy, I mean, you have a fan for life, and it just shows the power of laughter in a world that is not. They don't want us to laugh.
Yeah.
So I did want to pivot to this. We only have a couple minutes left because I know that you have a hard stop, and I want to be cautious to that. I would love to talk about the Babylon Bee movie. I watched the whole thing last night, and I got to give you a big shout out, Kyle, because you remember how I told you my wife is not, I would not call her a comedy aficionado.
Mm-hmm.
She's more of a drama kind of movie. And I said, hey, I want you to come watch part of this movie with me. And she's like, I'll come down. I'm like, hey, I'm talking to Kyle tomorrow. Come watch this thing. She's like, I'll stay for 5 minutes. She stayed for like a lot of like the majority of the movie. And when it first flashed on, and you had like the FBI, the CIA, like those first opening sequences, she chuckled. And I was just like, oh, that is the biggest compliment I could give you. You got a chuckle out of my wife on dry comedy. So I had to give you your flowers right off the bat when we started talking about it.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't have a question there. That was just a statement. I kind of like let that hang. But I had a bunch of questions as I was going through the movie. And the first question I had was in regards to, for those that haven't seen the movie, go watch it. Subscribe to the Babylon Bee on X. It's one of the ways you can watch it. And Kyle, I'll give you an opportunity to plug it later towards the end of however you want to. But please go watch the movie. It was hilarious. You guys did a great job from it was very dry comedy-esque and a lot of breaking the fourth wall, looking at the camera. It was just a good production. But I had to wonder the whole time, in the film, you took obviously the satirical approach. You were from like kind of the left saying this is awful and we're going to prove that it's awful. And then you guys interviewed people that were at January 6th, that had been put in jail, that had been targeted by the FBI. My first question to you about the movie is this, and I don't know how much you can or can't answer me. Were you guys concerned jumping into this about getting in trouble from the government? Like January 6th from the left, like there were people like, I mean, the Lectern guy, for example, and a couple of the other people that you interviewed that legit got jail time or solitary. Were you guys concerned jumping into this world that it was going to come actually impact you guys on a personal and familial level?
I mean, not necessarily that like making this movie in any way would get us in trouble. I mean, it definitely puts you in a certain camp. like, it definitely makes a statement where people are like, oh, you're one of those guys, even though I think the movie isn't trying to say that January 6th was a great day or that we support it necessarily. Like that we supported all the riots and all the crazy stuff. Like, clearly, I think the message of the movie is January 6th was a bad day, but it wasn't the worst day, which is the line that, that progressives and journalists have used for years, is that this was as bad as 9/11 and all this crazy stuff, so that's pretty squarely what it's targeted at. But on another level, like it already did, January 6th prosecution already did affect the Babylon Bee. Siaka Massaquoi is one of our actors, and he's in the movie and he got raided by the FBI and arrested and separated from his wife on the tarmac, his pregnant wife on the tarmac, 3 years after the event because he's such a threat to democracy. And that is already hitting close to home for us, when you have people like that. And yeah, he's not like an employee of the Babylon Bee, but he was one of our actors in one of our most popular series and a good friend of all of ours. So there's a sense in which we're already that one level of separation away from January 6th prosecutions where it was like, oh, well, we're going all in, I guess.
Did you have to worry about when you had, because you had like I noticed the shaman guy with the buffalo horns. That I know that guy was all over the news, and I know in the segment he didn't say anything in the movie. It was funny where Travis sat down, they ate steak. I think the guy said like let's steak or something, and then it was a quiet interview, and then Travis left. Was that, and I don't know if you can share, these are just questions I had watching the film. Was that just something because he wasn't allowed to say anything, or you guys didn't want him to say anything at that point? Because it was a funny sequence, but I was just like, man, I wonder if there's more to this scene that he was willing to come on, but he didn't want to say anything or wasn't allowed to say anything else.
A combination, but it was a decision we made in editing. It wasn't actually written in the script like that. We had a couple versions. We had a version where, there was a longer interview similar to the one we did with Siaka or the one we did with Lectern guy, where Buffalo guys like actually just, we're drilling him on all this stuff, and he's doing the same thing where he's like, oh, actually, I just walked in, and but for a couple of reasons, I think one of which it was just a little repetitive in that you had kind of already seen that angle with the other two interviews. I always love that actually came a lot from Monty Python, where in Monty Python there's that in the Holy Grail there's that running subplot where the documentarian is like following around where Arthur went, and then he gets randomly killed, and then the police come in to investigate, and it has nothing to do with the rest of the movie, and it keeps randomly cutting to these long scenes where where it's just quiet, and the police are like slowly walking into the scene, like taking notes, looking at a crime scene, and they're basically tailing Arthur and his knights. And then at the end of the movie, that's the big subversion. And Monty Python, spoiler alert, they're charging in to get the Grail, and the cops show up and arrest them all. And that's just so I love those like random, like you have these action scenes and then it's like a quiet cutaway to something. And so that turned into Travis's like searching for Buffalo guy in the wilderness. And so we were trying to figure out a way to like really end it in a strong way. And we just decided to do, and this is again, this is the comedian who is willing to be an idiot and do something that a lot of people won't get. And I'm sure we have a lot of confused boomers who watch the movie and they're like, why didn't he say anything? But it was like kind of the Napoleon Dynamite, like, okay, bye.
Well, it was hilarious. Like, on all the scenes with Travis were kind of like, I feel like 5 seconds longer than you wanted them to be. And I feel like that was intentional because you're watching him like walk across this river and going rock by rock. And then he slips and falls in, and he's just like, and it's just like one frame, just watching him do this slowly. And it's almost painful comedy because you're watching this like laughing, but also like this is a unique style choice.
And we cut those scenes down because I wanted them to be even longer. Because there's this principle in comedy where like there's an uncanny valley in editing for that stuff, because if it's short, then it's like, okay, it was just supposed to be short. And then if it's you're like, oh, that went on a little too. Then if it's a little too long and then a little too much longer, it falls back. It circles back into being funny again. Like,
yes,
like everybody's kind of laughing. Oh, it's still going. Oh, it's still going. And it kind of signals to the viewer like, oh, obviously this was intentional. So I love those long scenes. I think we cut like 2 or 3 of them just for length in the movie. But I would watch a whole movie of Travis just wandering through the wilderness.
Yeah, it was incredibly done. Was this your guys' first documentary style movie that the Bee produced?
Yeah, this kind of came out of a few different places. Like we were looking to do a bigger film, a bigger TV show type thing, and we wanted to get our feet wet. And so we decided we'd just make one ourselves. Like obviously we talked to a lot of people in the film industry that want to do something with us, but it's like, you know what? For this to be like authentically Babylon Bee, we just need to do it ourselves. And so that's where it came from. And then we had done some dry, sketches and newsy sketches. We did one in particular. I think it's called like The Scariest Facts About Guns or something. And I host it, and I'm just like the most, and I'm not a great actor, but I'm just the most dry, like saying things very simply. And I'm holding up guns and being like, this is the death trigger that kills people on sight. Like just is kind of a liberal journalist who's a bit of an idiot. And that became one of our most popular videos. And we're like, well, what if we took that documentary style of dumb journalist and we just kind of put him in this thing where he's super serious and he's investigating something as the most serious, scariest thing ever. And everybody's like, no, it's not that bad. And and then I watched Kunk on Earth with my son. My son showed me Kunk on Earth. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is everything I've ever wanted in a comedy show. And so that kind of like interviewing experts and they're like not really in on the joke, sort of, just giving you dry answers. I love that format. And so we kind of adapted that for this.
So how much do you tell people like, Michael Knowles and, other guests and Prager, like how much did you let them in on the shtick before the show or before you guys recorded?
Well, as I watched a lot of Kunk on Earth, I kind of figured out how they do it, I think. And so we tried to kind of do that same style where it's like, they don't really know what's coming. They don't really know what questions are coming. But you prep them at the beginning, like, hey, I'm playing a character and I'm an idiot. You just be you and act like a liberal journalist and or a 3-year-old is interviewing you. And you're trying to actually get real facts across. And you're taking the interview seriously. So I think the example I always use is something like, like what happened on January 6th? Did Godzilla destroy the Capitol? And then I would tell them like, your response could be something like, well, Godzilla's, not real. He's from the movies, but yeah, some protesters did come to the Capitol and blow. So it's like try to spin the question and keep going. And so some of the guests were better at that than others. Some of them, sometimes you interview people and they try to be too funny. They try to play up the joke and not be the straight man when they really need to be the straight man. But we got a lot of stuff that worked great. And in fact, the first one we did was the Ryan Williams interview, the guy from the Claremont Institute, and that was like a test interview because we didn't know how well it was going to work. And so he said, well, let's just get a local, and he was local to us. We're like, let's just get a local political expert and we'll just interview him and see how it goes. So we did it with him, and his answers are so dry and so perfect that he became one of the best interviews in the whole movie. I think, in fact, the one that where I say, like, can you explain the certification to me using Pokemon characters? And he goes like, so say Steelix and Mewtwo and Pikachu. Like, that's him. Like, that we didn't give him.
I was going to ask that. That was just fully, he just starts ripping off Pokemon, Charmander or whatever.
Well, he's like, and we're trying not to laugh. And then at the end we start busting up and I'm like, dude, how did you pull those out? And he's like, well, my son's really into Pokemon. And it's perfect because he kind of mispronounces Pokemon a little bit. So it's like something you can't script. So
when you
beautiful.
said after that, when you said, well, Pikachu can't talk, so that was also just off the whim quip.
Yeah.
Because it was so funny. I thought it was scripted. And that was great.
No. A lot of the little random quips like that I give at the end, sometimes my cinematographer, he doesn't like to be called cinematographer. My director of photography, Brandon, he's great at, like, I write a lot of the scripted stuff, and then he's great at sitting behind the camera going, hey, say this, and then you say it, and then we end up like doing this comedy thing where we're just saying the more and more insane lines. And then in editing, we kind of just trim back to what worked the best. But he's great at that improv stuff. That's where a lot of the improv comes from.
One more question for you, and then we can kind of slowly wrap up for you. I really think everyone needs to see this movie. And I think one thing that you guys did a really tasteful job of, because I was really interested to see, because I've been called, dude, on Twitter, you could call a bunch of things. And I'm nowhere near the popularity level you guys are. Like, I'm a little mini minnow swimming in the conservative pool. And, but I've been called a Christo-fascist, and I've been called a crazy and everything. I didn't even know what Christo-fascist was. I had to look it up on Google. Apparently, it's a new buzzword going out. I don't know if you've heard of that yet, Kyle, but apparently that's the new.
I've heard that one, yeah.
Yeah, so I had to look that one up. But when I questioned January 6th, I received an insane amount of like, how dare you conspiracy theorist, evil person. And I was really interested to see the way that you guys took it. You guys are satire. And I think the way you guys did it, which is really interesting, the whole movie was satire. Like, you were pretending to be the left, being this satirical character. And then if you watch the film, it's like what you said. You can't get in trouble by the authorities because in the film you were saying that it was a terrible day. But everyone knows you're joking, but you never admitted you were joking. So I guess, was that intentional to where you didn't want to create something that was like a normal documentary where you were like, hey guys, January 6th was a joke. Don't listen to the left. They're evil. They're terrible. You almost are impervious to attacks from like the government because you literally in the film are saying this is a bad day, even though everyone knows you're joking, but they can't prove it. Does that make sense what I'm kind of saying?
Yeah, it's what's beautiful about satire and jokes, and like, there's no response to them, other than being funnier. I don't know, like, you see people on Twitter or whatever that get mad at you or try to come at you. And if you just respond with a joke, especially like a self-deprecating joke, and you're like, yeah, it's, yeah, I am a Christo-fascist, whatever it is. It's like, there's no response to it. There's nothing that people can say, because they just look dumb when they sit there and keep yelling at you, I think like, one example, I think Snopes one time fact checked our article where we said that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went on The Price is Right and guessed that everything is free, and they fact checked it, which is like just so stinking hilarious in itself. And we responded with like a quote tweet, or like we kind of retweeted our article where we said, hey, Snopes has let us know that this is false, and we would like to retract it. After further review, it turns out that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not go on The Price is Right and guess that everything is free. It turns out that our writer made this story up. Like, this was just invented, And when you're continuing to kind of play with it and keep it serious, and take it seriously, keep it within this world of satire, it's like, what are they going to say to that? There's nothing else that you can do with it. The other thing I do a lot of times is I do this explain the joke bit on X, where we'll tell a joke and people are like, this is terrible conservative comedy, I don't understand, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like you share it and you're like, you obviously didn't understand the joke. Let me explain it. And then you just repeat the exact joke word for word. And they're like, what? That's not explaining the joke. And it's
just this forever cycle.
Yeah. So you share it again, well, here, you obviously didn't get it. Let me explain it one more time. It's just like when somebody looks so humorless and you have a great sense of humor, you're always going to win that exchange, because you're not taking yourself seriously. And I don't care if people think we're dumb or whatever. Like, you can't take yourself seriously to be a good comedian. You have to be willing to be the idiot. And so we're willing to be the idiot. That's the tagline. Babylon Bee. Willing to be the idiot.
I'll make that the title of this podcast. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, Seth will love that. Are you guys hoping to make more movies? Is this just kind of the step, like dipping the toe in, just kind of seeing what it takes to produce a film and edit and all this? Is there more down the pipeline coming that you guys would love to do? Or
yeah, absolutely. Like, that's we were kind of doing this in some ways as like a test. Is this do people like our sense of humor when it comes? Obviously, like, our headlines, great, everybody loves them. Our video sketches, great, everybody loves them. But it's like, does that translate to a long format? Maybe not. Like, there's some things that shouldn't be full length movies. I mean, The Onion did a movie 20 years ago and it was terrible. Like, that's
not surprising.
Well, I mean, there's a sense in which maybe it was just the fact that like little news like soundbite style headlines don't translate well into like, it's funny when it's across your Facebook feed, but it's not going to work as a full length movie. So we needed to see, like, is this going to work? And it worked. Like, we got tons of new subscribers. It got a lot of buzz. We had a lot of people talking about the movie. So it was like, oh, our audience likes this kind of stuff. Let's do the next one. So that was kind of that was like the canary in the coal mine to see if this was going to be a disaster or not. And it worked out really well. So we're already, workshopping our next couple of movies for next year.
What was one of the surprisingly hardest things about creating this movie that you didn't see coming? And then what was one of the most rewarding things that you didn't see coming either?
I would say the hardest thing was making a full-length movie has a lot of challenges that you don't have when you're shooting short internet sketches. Like cohesion and narrative, and saying like, how does this piece lead into that piece, and how does this go into that? And there was like there were weak points in the script that I didn't see because I didn't have the experience of doing this kind of thing before. So it's like, I wrote the whole script and then like, great, let's shoot it. And then you're like, oh shoot, this doesn't really make sense because 3 scenes ago, this guy said this, and now we're talking about this again. And how does that, so trying to like, in editing, trying to like smush it all together in a way that made sense. And the balance of making it feel like a full movie, but at the same time, having each scene kind of play out like a funny sketch. That's the real balance, because you don't want it to come off like random isolated sketches. And at the same time, if it's like this long, dramatic narrative, like you still want every line to be funny. And so that balance of short-term funny and long-term funny was a challenge. I think we pulled it off. But obviously we learned a lot of lessons for next time, like even from the scripting phase, like, oh, next time I write the script, I'm going to know, oh, if I write this joke here, you need to reference it again here, or like, this is too many callbacks. This isn't enough callback. Like we learned a lot of things from the bird's eye view of how to do something for the next time. And then in terms of what was the most rewarding, honestly, I learned a lot when I was doing the movie. I think going into it, I thought the liberal talking points about January 6th were dumb. Like I'm like, oh, it's not 9/11. Come on, people. And that's the point I was making, right? But like when I talked to Michael Knowles and he was giving us, and he did that kind of all off the cuff. I'm like, oh, just list some of the complaints that January 6th protesters had. And he was like rattling off, well, here's all their complaints. And then it's talking to Ryan Williams of the Claremont Institute, like, well, tell me some of the things they were upset about. And he's like, well, the 2020 election, a lot of the states broke the Constitution when they took their votes, you know. And I'm like, wait, what? Like I knew that there were some irregularities. I knew that people, but I guess in some sense, I still kind of thought of the January 6th protesters as like, the election was stolen. You know, they're making up all these votes and the illegals made up millions of, and that's not necessarily the case. Like a lot of the complaints were just, hey, the state constitution says this, and you guys unilaterally, citing COVID, you know, changed that and said, no, we're taking the vote this way instead. And that was the legal grounds on which they were trying to protest the election. And I'm like, oh, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. And yes, they have the right, obviously they have the right as American citizens to publicly protest this kind of things and register their objections. So like me actually seeing these people that were affected by it and seeing their heart and like talking to Lectern Guy and talking to Siaka, who I already knew, but I'm talking to some of the people that were affected and they're like the nicest people you will ever meet.
Yeah.
And all of them having honestly the same line, like, I went to see President Trump because I voted for him and I supported him. And everybody started walking towards the Capitol, so I did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And some things got out of control. And I was like, oh, that's kind of crazy. And I left. And then I got attacked by the FBI. Like that, the way that they treated them like you were trying to overthrow the government. And talking to them, and they're like, I went to see a speech. Like there was no plan. There was no plan. That's every single person I talked to was the same thing. Like I had no plan to overthrow the government. If I did, I would have brought guns.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
Yeah.
That kind
I'm
of,
not carrying a lectern 10 feet. Like that's not going to be what I do if I want to overthrow the government.
Exactly. And you hear that talking point on conservative podcasts or whatever, but to actually talk to the people who were there that I know and trust, and I know they're honest people and good people and are like, yeah, dude, nobody was trying to overthrow the government. Maybe some people got insane and went crazy and broke stuff and they shouldn't have, but like this was not an insurrection. It honestly changed my mind about a lot of things and made me rethink a lot of things about January 6th.
I mean, it just shows how dangerous the media is. Like just the spin that they can do. And then even in Trump's speech, which you guys played in the film, he said, let's peacefully make your voices known. That is the exact verbiage from Trump. And then for him to tweet a video later saying, do not do anything violent, that then Twitter suppressed, whatever. Like the amount of just wild thing. And then people like me and you, and like even like I was talking to my dad, like what we saw, like they showed like one clip of like police and people bashing at the big, Capitol, like, wow, this is bad. And they completely ignored the fact that people were inside just talking to the cops, or that there were cops getting pictures done and selfies. And like they completely ignored that, and shows the danger of propaganda. Like to me, this whole event, and then you guys did a great job in the film talking about the George Floyd riots. It's like, it's not even comparable. Like what are we doing here? And you guys just did a great job of picking through all that stuff. And I think that's where your film, to me, shines, Kyle, is coming from someone that I've had conspiracy theorists on my show. I've had, liberal people on my show. I've had conservative, like you guys did a really fair job, I think, of just poking fun at the holes that the media just spins this thing to just to create a frenzy. It's the same thing they did with COVID. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, was the conspiracy theorist on your show, was that Joel?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Well, actually, he did. He introduced me to Abby Libby, and
that makes
Kyle,
sense.
and so I've had them. So it was because of Joel. Actually, yes, it did tie back to Joel.
Okay. Yeah, it all makes sense. Yeah, but that's what the fun of the Babylon Bee is we get to be journalists, and make fun of journalists. And journalists, like, number one thing is taking themselves very seriously. Like, they do think that they're the guardians of democracy. And, obviously, like, journalism as a concept has a great place in democracy. Like, it's important to be able to call the government to account. But these people that have just become leftist hacks, as the newspapers have been for decades, it's so fun to take to see them take themselves so seriously, and then as the Babylon Bee, be able to absolutely skewer them. It's the thing that they hate the most. If you take yourself seriously, the absolute worst thing for you is to be made fun of. And for us to be able to do that on a regular basis, you can see why they fact check us. You can see why they censor us. You can see why they come after us with hit pieces, because we are exposing them for who they are as these leftist partisan hacks.
And I think it's something in a way that only comedy can do. Because comedy is so, like, if I watch the Michael Knowles show and he's talking about January 6th, you could be like, oh, I'm kind of persuaded. But dude, you cannot watch the Babylon Bee movie, The Deadliest Day, without coming away and saying the media lied to me about January 6th. It is impossible. And you did that through comedy. And I think that's communicated in a way that only comedy can do. Because it was so, it wasn't attacky. Like, you just watched it, lighthearted film, but it was conveying truth at the same time. And I think there's something really special about comedy that is powerful.
Yeah, comedy communicates truth. Comedy has a power to say something that somebody's guard is going to be up. If you're just like, the media's lying about January 6th, they're like, guard up. I know where you're coming from. I've heard this kind of thing before. Like, this disagrees with my worldview, so my guard is up. But if you're just making a joke, it's like, I'm laughing. Hey, wait a minute. Maybe that's true.
Wait a second. Right. You actually have a good point there.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I know we have a hard stop at an hour. I wanted to kind of keep to that. I could talk to you for another hour. I have so many questions about the film. Maybe we'll have you back on the show in another time. And, maybe on the next movie, we'll have you back on. I did want to give you a quick opportunity. Any plugs for the Bee? Anything that you want to kind of have my listeners do? Any place that they can find you guys? I want to give you a quick opportunity to do that.
Yeah, if you go to babylonbee.com/January 6th, you can subscribe, support our work, help support a little independent conservative satire site, change the world, and watch our new movie. We also have a new book out, The Babylon Bee Guide to the Apocalypse. If you go to our site, babylonbee.com, there's a giant banner you can click on and check that out. That's been a lot of fun. So on to the next thing. Hopefully next year for our subscribers, we'll have couple more movies out. That would be great. And more exclusive content. We're trying to build up our little comedy empire. So thank you guys for your support.
Awesome, bro. Well, thank you for coming on the show. This is ever since I had Joel on, literally, you can ask my wife, I'm like, man, one day I want to get Kyle, man. I just want to talk to Kyle. So I appreciate you taking the time I know I'm such a little fish in the interviews and the people you guys talk to. I mean, you're friends for Elon Musk, for goodness sake. You have no business talking to me. So I appreciate you spending an hour with me. And guys, please support the Babylon Bee. If you're new to the show, subscribe, follow Kyle. Kyle's very active on Twitter. So is Joel, or X, excuse me. So is Joel, so is Seth. So if you want to get some more inside look to the comedians themselves, you can go follow them on X. Thank you for enjoying the show, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you.